Thanks, everybody. I'm so thrilled to see you all in person. This is a lot of fun. So welcome to the ESPM seminar. I'm thrilled to see you guys, but I'm also very thrilled to meet Karen Joyce. She's somebody I have been idolizing from afar for a long time, and I finally got to meet her about 10 minutes ago. Super pleased to introduce you to her. She's visiting us from James Cook University in Australia. She's an absolute legend in the world of drones. She's an expert in mapping tropical coral communities around the world. She's worked on the Great Barrier Reef. She's done extensive work also mapping mangrove communities, and she's a world leader in incorporating drone data and satellite data into disaster response. So she's going to give us a great talk today about some of those projects, I think. She's also one of my idols for her work creating fair drone data. So findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable fair drone data. And this is a real challenge. Like, we're all taking drone, we're capturing drone image. Where can we put these data so that other people can use them? And Karen's been at the forefront of making this happen. So super thrilled about that work. And through this, she's actively empowering communities to utilize these open source drone and other data products. So very excited about that work. And if you're interested in it, maybe you're going to talk about it, but her GeoNadar project is well worth a visit. I check it out all the time. She's also the lead author on an important recent editorial that I always like to talk about. It's called "Of Course We Fly Unmanned. We're Women," with a group of other women authors. And it's really doing more than anything else to help us to change that acronym from unmanned aerial vehicles to uncrewed or something else. So please join me in welcoming Karen to ESPM. So take it away.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for coming down. And I'd like to say thanks to Maggie for inviting me, but she didn't actually invite me. I invited myself. So thank you for accepting my invitation to come down and chat. I'm really excited to be here. It's my first time in Berkeley, so it's really lovely to wander around the campus, as I did earlier with Sarah, and to see what's around it. It's really, really beautiful. I'm going to talk about a few different things today. But my first question for you is to have a think about your own behavior, how you live and how you work. And this one question for you: are you a hoarder or a minimalist? Which do you identify as? So are you the sort of person that likes to keep all of your stuff at home, or do you get rid of stuff? Have a think about it. And as you're doing that, I'd like you to look up the QR code, and don't read what's there at the moment just yet. I'll step you through it, but just grab the QR code and we can play along with the game that we've got. So I'll just give you a moment or two to pull up that QR code. And again, don't worry about what's on the screen just yet. Maybe just look up when you're done so I know where people are at. It will come up again if you don't quite get to it. We good? We continue? All righty. So what I'd like to do next is to take you through a little bit of what I like to think of as a diagnostic tool. I imagine everyone's done a Myers-Briggs or something like that before, right? And asks you a set of questions and it tells you what type of person you are. So we're going to find out who the hoarders are and who the minimalists are in the room today. And the first question I have for you is just thinking about this scenario. So you had a wonderful dinner party last night, amazing, lots of friends over. But of course, there's a lot of wine bottles and beer bottles and cans and all these types of things left over. So my question for you is, what do you do with all of your empty bottles and cans? So I've got a couple of options for you, and I want you to think about what best describes what you do at the end of a dinner party with all your bottles and cans. And I'm going to ask you to put your answer into the little app that you just opened. So the first one is, do you make a pile in the garden and forget about them? Do you reuse them for home brew or something of that description? Maybe making a vase, something like that, any kind of reuse. Do you keep them just in case? Do you put them in the rubbish bin? Do you put them in the recycling? Do you go to one of the recycling centres to get, I don't know if it's a 5 or a 10 cent refund, depending on where you are and the size of the bottle or can you're returning? Or do you give the kid down the road your bottles and cans so that they can get that refund? All right, so what is it that you do with your bottles and cans after your dinner party? If you want to have a look at the app now, the QR code's back up there. Just pop in what it is that best describes what you do. And look up when you're done, so now we can move on. Right, so borders are minimalist. We have lots and lots of people putting in the recycling bin. Great job. Got a few brewers. Some seeking a refund, some giving to the kid down the road. So this is the reason that my 12-year-old is super rich, because we have a neighbor that does this and he gets lots and lots of money. And looks like we don't have too many quarters on this question. All right, let's up the ante a little bit with something that costs you a little bit more money. Let's think about an old pair of jeans, all right? You loved this pair of jeans, but for some reason it's no longer fitting you, or you don't enjoy them anymore. You're too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, out of fashion, whatever it is. You do not wear this pair of jeans anymore. What do you do with those jeans? Do you vacuum pack them and store them in the garage? Do you make them into some kind of napkin, maybe for your dinner party, or something similar? Someone does. Do you reuse them in some way? Do you keep them at the bottom of the wardrobe just in case? Rubbish bin? Give them to friends or to an op shop? What do you sell on eBay? Which one's you? Oh, sorry, yes, thrift store. Yeah. Which one is you?
The people online say it's unmute. Yes, you're on mute. Look at the screen up.
Only one to unmute here. Because it's my turn. All right, you decided what you do with the jeans? All right, order or minimalist, that's how it works. Oh, lots of people giving to the thrift store. We've got some hoarders in the bottom of the wardrobe. And some users, cool. All right, do we have any entrepreneurs here that are selling on eBay? Not so much. We got some vacuum packers. All right, awesome. Okay, next one. All right, so why would I be talking about these types of things? You're thinking about what's the difference between a linear and a circular economy, right? A linear economy is where we have our products and materials, we manufacture them or create them in some way, we use them and then we dispose of them, right? Then the circular economy is keeping them in the system for as long as possible as we reuse them. And basically we're looking so far at our everyday behaviors with these types of products. Well, let's think about something that's a little bit different, but we can actually think about it in the same way. All right, so let's think about some data. Think about some data that you have captured, and it's not like your personal data, right? So maybe some scientific data, it could be drone data, it could be airborne imaging, it could be some of your field observations, anything at all, any of that type of data. What do you do with your data? Same sort of questions. Do you leave in the bottom drawer? I suspect there's quite a few of those. Do you use in some way, maybe for a blog, or you give somebody else so they can reuse it or something like that? Are you storing on a hard drive or a server somewhere just in case you're still waiting for that Nature publication? Maggie's doing that one. All right, do you delete it? Do you put in an online repository for others to find somewhere? Or do you hope that someone's going to buy it from you? Okay. Might laugh, but maybe, right? It might be valuable in some way. What do you do? And is your behavior with your data any different to your bottles and cans and to your jeans? And is it related to the amount that you feel like it's worth? I'm not sure. Have a think about that. All right, is everyone good? Just in case. We've got lots of just in cases. Interesting. We got some putting in an online repository, lots of bottom drawers. All right. So, what does that make you think about yourself? Are you a hoarder or a minimalist? If you typically answered in the 1, 2, or 3, you're my hoarders. Later, so 4, 5, 6, or 7, you're more of the minimalist you're getting rid of. And of course, you can have a foot in both camps, and you might be a hoarder in one sense and a minimalist in another. Doesn't matter. It's just the same like Myers-Briggs, right? It's never exactly right, but it's just getting you to think about what type of personality you are. So I think we've got 3 types of hoarders. We have our out of sight, out of mind people. These are your vacuum packers, put stuff in the garage. We have our purposeful hoarders, those that are hoarding to do something with their things, you know, maybe making a vase out of your wine bottles or something. And our just in cases, which we had a lot of those in the data space, right? Our minimalists are our deleters, get rid of it, don't want it, don't care about it, just get it out of my way. And we have those that share things. And of course, you can actually hoard and share data at the same time, right? It's not like your pair of jeans. You're not going to hoard one leg and then share the other leg, but data you can do it. So I can hoard my data, but I can also give it to you. And then we have entrepreneurs who are looking to make some kind of return for their products, materials, or potentially data as well. I'm going to come back to these concepts in order to have a think about who you are and what you do with your data in particular. And I'm going to tell you a bit about my background and my story and where I fit into this whole idea of circularity within our economy. So I am from Australia, and my biggest research question that I've worked on for the past 25 years is to try to figure out how much live coral we have on the Great Barrier Reef. Does anybody know how much live coral we have on the Great Barrier Reef? Nobody? Really? Nobody knows? No, nobody actually does know. Not just in this room, but nobody actually does know the answer to that question, right? And sorry, what's that?
Less than 10 years ago.
Well, maybe, but we don't know what we had 10 years ago. So how do we answer that question now if we don't know what we had 10 years ago? Or 20 years ago, whatever, still not from 25 years of my career. But let's look at why we may not know the answer to that question. So Australia, big country, Queensland on the right-hand side, Great Barrier Reef in the white polygon there. So the Great Barrier Reef spans a length of about 1,500 miles or so. It's about half the size of Texas. Do you think that we know all the plants in Texas? So why would we actually know all the corals on the Great Barrier Reef? Because that's even more remote to get to than Texas, right? It's pretty challenging. Does anyone know how many reefs we have on the Great Barrier Reef? Any guesses? So it's not one. There's about 3,000 individual reefs. So 3,000 individual reefs of an area half the size of Texas. Not really surprising that we don't actually know what's there. It's a really big challenge. I'm going to tell you a story from down the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, and I'm going to zoom all the way into this particular reef here. This is Heron Reef. This is, I would say, one of the most well-studied reefs in the world. So Heron Reef looks kind of like an upside-down dead rat. Yeah. Sure. The eye of the rat is the island on the western end there. The reef itself is about 7 miles long and about 3 miles north-south. Okay, so it's a pretty large reef, I guess. And remember that there's 3,000 just like this. So again, not surprising we don't actually know what's there. So just a bit of context there. The island, quite small. It's 800 meters east-west, so 2 laps around an athletics field, whatever that is in feet and yards. Sorry, can't go that far. Half of it is national, well, all of it's national park. The western half of it is a split between a research station and a resort. Okay, so pretty small on the island compared to the reef itself. Now, I'm going to zoom all the way into this particular area. And now that we're just down at one reef, I want you to tell me if you can see now how much live coral we have just on this part of the Great Barrier Reef. Does anyone know? Still know? So this is Landsat imagery, and every pixel that you see there, it represents 30 by 30 meters. Okay. It's a bit of a challenge. I still can't get to how much live coral I have. Okay, I'm going to zoom all the way into the space here. and now go down to the highest commercially available satellite data that we have. So something like what you might see on Google Earth. Anyone tell me how much live coral we have? Still no go? All right, so we've really got big challenges, right? And so that's why I work with drones. Can you see the live coral in this picture? So if you haven't worked with coral before, the live parts are all the little bits around the outside of those big chunks that you see, I guess. So they're all the brownish bits, around the outside here and here, the brown bits around here. The whiter grayer bits are dead, and that's perfectly okay. It doesn't mean to say it's unhealthy, because usually the top of the coral dies as it grows out, and that's just the level of the water. Okay, so that's what we're working with when we're looking at drones. Now we could actually say, well, you know what, I can do even better if I'm going to go underwater, right? So you should be able to see now where the live coral is. Yeah, as we've zoomed all the way in, we're just underwater. Yeah, we can see really well. And could ask the question then, well, why not just use this? Because I can definitely see the live coral there, right? So why not just use that everywhere? And well, of course, the answer is that the Great Barrier Reef is a really, really big place. So this is one of my colleagues, and he's swimming along. He's got a long bar in front of him. There's 3 GoPros looking directly down. Those 3 GoPros are taking photos every second as he's swimming along. You'll see his buddy come into screen in a moment. He's swimming quite far away from his buddy. And as he's swimming along here, you can see he's got a bright orange bag on his bag that's got a GPS in it, so that's tracking where he is. And I want you to just see how small he is. And I'm not a videographer. I work with data, not videography, so I'm not very smooth on the old video footage here. But again, I want you to get that perspective of how small Javier is compared to that Heron Island just that you see there, which I showed you in the satellite image, right? So teeny tiny person. So you say, well, underwater looks great. That's amazing, but how do we do that over a place where there's 3,000 of these reefs and it's a really, really massive area? So that's not the answer for us to do that. And so then we come back to drones. So the challenge though with drones is that I still feel kind of small, right? This is again me standing just on the island of Heron Reef, and I'm kind of little. And I think, well, if I actually want to understand how much live coral we have on the Great Barrier Reef, or if I want to understand anything about any of our other global ecosystems, there needs to be a better way, because I'm too small. And the satellites are looking at things that need to be too big. So what is the answer there? So the answer, of course, is community. And how do we get people all around the world, because there are hundreds of thousands of people with drones, people who are like me who capture drone data, how do we actually get that in a place that can help us to all answer these types of questions that we're looking at? So you see here, this is Jeff Gillen. He's a professor in Arizona, and he's interested in savanna ecosystems and recovery after fire. We've got Andrea up the top right there, and she works on glaciers in Switzerland. And down the bottom, we have some Indigenous rangers in Australia who are interested in using drones and to look at how they map their sea country. So really diverse ways in which they're using drones and using the data, but they're all actually doing really similar things. And they're all mapping parts of country that are really, really important to them. But one of the biggest challenges that we all have is that this is where our data sits. So maybe it's on a server, maybe it's on SD cards, maybe it's on a computer hard drive, an external hard drive, whatever, but they're typically just held to us and to us as ourselves, right? So all of my data I have, and it sits on my own little server, but nobody else can access it. And if you're interested in what I do, it's really hard to be able to share that with you. So when I started looking at this as a problem, I thought, well, what are some other areas where we do a really, really good job of making things open? And of course, you have to go to Landsat, right? And when President Obama made the call in 2008 to make all of the Landsat archive openly available, he went from having a business model for Landsat, which was out of reach for most people to purchase data, How many people have worked with Landsat data before? Yeah. How many people worked with data when you had to buy a scene? Any? A couple? And a quarter scene? You'd buy like one little quarter scene. So Heron Reef was on one quarter scene. It would cost me $1,500. That's what I purchased as an undergraduate. I could buy it once and once only, right? And now you can look at the entire archive, nearly 50 years worth of data, that if you didn't come from that, had to purchase that sort of stuff, you're really like, wow, I can't imagine what that was like. So turned a model where you had to purchase something which was never getting enough revenue for the United States government into something that unlocked a $17 billion industry by making stuff free, which is super cool. So I'm so inspired by that in combination with what we talked about at the very beginning, thinking about our habits and behaviors of what we do with reuse and recycle. And if you think maybe when you're a kid, maybe you didn't recycle as much, and maybe there weren't so many recycling bins all over campus and all these sorts of things that are now available, and it's really, really common. Most people said that they would recycle their bottles and cans because it's easy. So we all do that as part of our daily life. But we hold our data just in case for something, I'm not exactly sure what. So how do we take the mentality of the reuse and recycle of our daily products into our data? And what does that look like? So I'm going to tell you another story based on the reef and where this has been really beneficial for me. All right, so this particular photo I took in 2016. It's also on Heron Reef. And some really nice corals, some nice features in that particular scene. If I was to say to you, how much would you pay for this photo? Would anyone like to buy that photo from me? What do you think it could be worth? Would you pay $10 for it? Would you pay $5? Would you pay nothing? Would you pay 1,000? Anything at all? Maybe not. No, probably not, right? It sits in a data set there's a couple of hundred other photos there that can all be brought together to create a mosaic. But the interesting part of this particular photo are these things. Does anyone know what they are? Yes, they're the sea cucumbers. Cucumbers. Does anyone know what sea cucumbers do in an ecosystem?
They eat sand and they poop sand.
They eat and they poop sand. It's beautiful. Their poop is cleaner than what goes in. When you walk on a reef that has sea cucumbers, you are walking on poop. Really, really important for the ecosystem because they are like the Hoover of the ecosystem, right? They're getting all the nasty bits and pieces out of the sand and cleaning it all up. Anyone else know what else sea cucumbers are good for? It's a really big fishery. So we export sea cucumbers to Asia. So they're dried and it's called bêche de mer. I've never tasted a sea cucumber. I don't particularly want to, but it's a reasonable sized fishery in Australia. In Mexico, it's also a really big fishery, but then sometimes they also stuff them with drugs before they ship them to Asia as well. So there's a bit of a double income on that. Anyway, these sea cucumbers are pretty interesting in Australia. Not just because of the fishery, but because of that ecosystem service. So you can see the poo there, no interesting poo. And here's a sea cucumber doing its thing as it's walking along. So if you haven't seen a sea cucumber before, I like this video because it actually shows them as being kind of cool. Like people don't study them because they're not as exciting as dolphins or sharks or rays or anything like that, but actually sea cucumbers are really interesting. And of course, we can see them in our drone data. So we use drones to count the sea cucumbers, both underwater and above water. And so I asked you how much you might pay for that particular photo. Now, if I was of the mindset that I needed to get financial compensation for that photo because it cost me thousands of dollars to get that photo, right? I had to get to the reef, I had to fly my drone, I had to have the experience and all this sort of stuff, right? If I wanted to say, well, I've got to recover at least say $1,000 for that photo to have made my trip worthwhile, no one was going to buy it from me. But I took a different route. I mean, not that I actually thought I'd get $1,000, but anyway, I put it up on my Twitter account and I said, hey, is anyone interested in sea cucumbers? I can count them in my drone data. I don't know anything about them, but I can see them in my drone data and I'm happy to collaborate with people who might be interested in sea cucumbers. And so what that resulted in was a huge range of collaborations. It's been 25 student projects, minor undergraduate projects, master's project, 2 PhDs, peer-reviewed articles, something that we call advertising space equivalent, which basically whenever our research is put out into the public domain through print, social media, radio or TV, we get a dollar value back for what that would have been if we had put an advertisement out. It's $150,000 worth of that. Global citizen science engagement, and has gone to more than $1 million worth of funding from one photo and the collaborations that were built after that. So you can start to see how Landsat turned around a $17 billion geospatial industry by making stuff for free, which I find is really fun. So that brings me back to the idea of the circular drone data, right? So how do we actually build an economy around something that's free? And what do we do with that? And what does that look like with drones? So my concept around that is that many of us are capturing data, whether that's drone data or any other types of data. How do we have a place where we can contribute that, allow us to curate it so that people can then work together, creating things, collaborating together, and then putting back into the system where we need to capture more. And so that's my model of the way that works. And so I'm going to break it down for you with how I built that out. So the first thing was that I had this first challenge I wanted to deal with. I had more than 100 different drone data sets, and I really, really wanted to share it, right? But I just had it on a server, I had folders of data. People would come to me and say, oh, no, you've been to this place, have you got any drone data? But I've never had an ability to share. So the first thing I wanted to do was to build a place that I could put my own data, and hopefully other people will do that too. So that's what we've done. Basically, if you go online, I can give you the link later. You can look at drone data now from around the world where people have contributed to an open platform like this, right? So there's over 750,000 images up there from all different types of ecosystems from 68 countries. So heaps and heaps of data, and it's all freely available for you to use as well. The next step that I had was, okay, that's really great for those of us who have the ability to process our own data. So maybe you're capturing your drone data, but you're processing it then with some other desktop or online software, and you're all happy doing that. But there's actually a lot of people that don't have the compute or the software available to them to be able to do that processing. So I thought, well, actually, if we want to open this to even more people, let's do processing as well. So the next thing we built was for people to be able to drag and drop raw drone photos onto a platform that we would then stitch together into what we call an orthomosaic. So this is basically a map, and also produce the additional products of being a digital terrain model, which is something that includes buildings and all the lumps and the bumps. And then the digital surface model that includes the lumps and the bumps. And then the digital terrain model, which cuts out the trees and the buildings and stuff to varying degrees of success, but it does anyway. So now you can put your data up there, and that's all processed and stored entirely on the platform for you, with the idea of keeping everything findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The next thing that we wanted to look at is this idea of, like, you know, it's great that you can do some of this processing online, but you know, the real value comes when I can start to interpret my data, right? And I want to be able to draw lines on my map and points, lines, polygons, and measure areas and all that sort of thing. But for a lot of the people that I work with, particularly some of the Indigenous communities, it's just too hard in GIS, right? To get started in any form of GIS, there's this massive learning curve. So hands up who's used GIS and thought, wow, that's just really hard to digitize something. Who uses ArcPro here? Yeah, who uses QGIS? Anything else in the main ones? Say again? MATLAB, yeah, cool. Does anyone know how many clicks you need to make to start digitizing a feature in ArcGIS Pro? Close, it's 12. So, you know, set up the feature class in the geodatabase and click through all the options and go to create and all these things. So it's crazy, like 12 clicks to get going. So what if you just had something super simple, you just went, yeah, I want a point here, so just drop a point. I'm gonna click point, do point, click line, do line. Just cut out some of the complexities that over the years we've built in, and there's probably some good reasons for it, but you don't necessarily need to do that. We wanted to cut out a lot of that stuff, cut out some of that complexity so that we can have something that's super easy for everybody to contribute to. And as we think about contributing, the next thing that I wanted to build in was to say, you know what, I love mapping. I really, really do love mapping, but what I love more is to be able to map with my colleagues, my peers, and my students. So how do we do that? We do this all the time with Google Docs or Teams, where we can send someone a link and we all jump in and we do things synchronously. We see what other people are doing. Why don't we do that with maps? And so the deal is you actually can, right? So you can work with maps collaboratively where people are jumping in and having that ability to comment and edit and all these things together, which is a super fun way of mapping. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on was then you saw all the dots all over the world and looked at how we can use community all around the world to build these really, really big data sets. And then I think a really true value of that comes into play when we think about, if we've got all of this data, how do we use it to calibrate and validate our satellite models? So come back to the Great Barrier Reef. Has anyone heard of the Island Coral Atlas? Yeah, a couple. So this is an interesting platform which has globally mapped all the coral reefs of the world. And you can jump online, you can download the data, and it was done through University of Queensland, University of Arizona, I think it is, and some external funding that they got. So these are some of the reefs in my backyard, basically, and we're going to jump into this particular reef here. So as we go in, we'll also see the different colors mean different things. So we've got coral, we've got microalgal mats, rock, rubble, sand, and seagrass. All right. So here's what the reef looks like in planet satellite imagery, which has got a 5 by 5 meter resolution. Here's what the classification looks like. So you can see that largely there's a huge part of this area which is all sand. The pink bits are the live coral. I'm going to dive right into this area. Oh, my mouse is here. Right into this area down here. This is what the satellite image looks like. Can you see the live coral there? Yeah, sure. What would you call this? If you had to name something, name this something. Someone's got a gun to your head. You must call this something. What are you going to call it?
Shallow water.
Shallow water. What about the bottom underneath that water? What is it going to be? Sand, probably. Yeah, that's what the Island Coral Atlas says. Aside from, for some reason, that this patch in the middle here is apparently coral. I don't know why it's any different, but that's the way it is. But if you have drone data there, there's still a lot of sand. Absolutely, there's still a lot of sand. But you see that there's a hell of a lot of stuff that's not sand as well, right? And if you dive all the way into this data set, you can see lots of really cool stuff. You can see areas where there is 100% live coral coverage. And we see lots of critters as well. So we've got our sea stars, we've got fish, we've got rays, clams, and there's some of our sea cucumber friends as well. So all this sort of stuff never gets captured when we're talking about global models. And the challenge is that if we're making assumptions, say, on how much live coral we have on the Great Barrier Reef, and we've got a big area that said, well, no, that's sand, we're just not even accounting for some of these habitats. And then we're building models off the back of that as well. So it's not just in these benthic habitats, it's in any global scale model that we're building, whether it's terrestrial or marine. I'm going to just talk just briefly about these clams as well, because the reason that we found these two clams, there was only 3 that we found on this entire reef, but the reason that we found them was because we were working in another area further south, and this is an area that was a clam fishery. And so you can actually see in that zoomed in area the density of clams here. So we were able to train a model on all the clams here and then deploy that with imagery across the Great Barrier Reef to find other reefs where the clams are as well. And so it's a really easy way of going, okay, well, I've got data in this place, let's train a model. And instead of just saying, oh, my model works, you're like, well, actually, I'm going to test it. I'm going to test it in New Caledonia. I'm going to test it in Hawaii. I'm going to test it in Belize, in all the different places where we might find these things, and does it work? And it's a really cool way of applying it because everybody's contributed to the one system. We find other things that are unexpected as well. So this animation looks at first glance like there's some major issues with georeferencing. These two orthomosaics were done 5 weeks apart. That island has shifted 40 meters north in that period. This island is 3 meters high, but it's unvegetated. So it just shifts all the time. And satellite data will never ever capture that, right? It just doesn't get the resolution, but also just the great timing of that. And you can actually see it, the northern part. One of my colleagues was there flying at the time, and she was walking around, and she had put some ground control points up here that she'd lost. But she said it just stank as she walked around there because the sand had just completely smothered the corals, and so the corals are dying as she's walking the area. The other fun things that you can do when you have a global database like this as well is to run competitions with school groups. So there's schools that some have drones, some don't, but you can still use a lot of the data on the system and the satellite data that's in the system as well to run a competition like what we do here every year. So we have this competition where schools or kids at the schools map their schools, and they're calculating the amount of green tree shade they have on their school campus, the percentage of that on their campus. So they use the platform to digitize their score, and then they'll send us in the maps to the competition as well. And so you see fun stuff like that. Kids take it a step further and they petition their PTA to get funding to plant more trees or build more shade for them to be outside. And they're getting certificates and all that sort of stuff as well. So it's a really, really fun way of bringing everyone together into a mapping system and then educating at a really, really junior level as well, which is always fun. So bring you back to the circular drone data economy that I introduced. And again, with that thought of our linear economy is having products and materials that we create or manufacture, we use and then dispose of. But the circular economy is trying to keep things in the system for as long as possible before they become terminal. So thinking about our data in that same way, how we capture data, what we do with it, and do we really need to hold it in a bottom drawer and either forget about it or hold it just for our own use when there's many, many other uses that other people might find helpful as well. And so coming back to my question of how do we work out how much live coral we have on the Great Barrier Reef? This is currently all the data sets that we now have on the Great Barrier Reef that's far above and beyond what I've captured for myself. And this is not through any kind of collaborative project. So the icons, the logos that you see up there, I haven't gone to these organizations and had to start a particular collaborative project to say, hey, can I get your data? I'm trying to bring it all together. We just put a place for it. And these are all the groups that have been adding into, in addition to some individual citizen scientists as well. So there's dots on the map, there's data up there that far expands what I could ever capture for myself, and it enables me to map with that as well. So I just wanted to leave you with just a thought. So this is from Sir David Attenborough. He says, if working apart we're a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together we're powerful enough to save it. And that's the way that I think about the circular drone data economy. Thank you very much.
Thanks for questions. And yeah, can you see the chat there if there's anything?
Yeah, no
So,
questions. Yeah.
We'll start with questions in the room, and then go to questions in the chat.
Not from an ethical standpoint, but I'm kind of curious your thoughts on like leveraging AI to sort of exploit imagery and then use it to predict what sort of could be future impacts from events. Like, how do people feel when I guess they're all adhering to the fair license, so it's like it doesn't matter what they feel, but what's the general sort of ethos around leveraging AI for that purpose? Like, who defines the greater good? And I don't know, the technology is And what's your position on it, I guess?
Yeah, cool. All right, I'm not sure if everyone heard that online, so I'll just repeat it just in case. So the question was, how do people feel about leveraging the global database with AI? And what's, I guess, what's the ethical standpoint on doing that sort of work? Is that reasonable?
Thanks.
So when people upload data into the system, they have the choice of if they want to hold it for themselves or if they want to add it to the global database. So that's the first choice that they make, and it's within the the fine print, if you like, that if you're adding it to the global database, that people can use it for whatever people might choose to use it for. Unfortunately, yes, we know that it could then be used for something that doesn't necessarily meet my values, and I actually cannot do anything about that. We do sort of have a fair use policy, and if we were to see something that we weren't happy with, then we could pull it down. But that's, yeah, it's just something that I don't really have control over in that kind of open data space. But in terms of general building AI models, I can't speak to all areas of the ethics of AI, but one thing I will bring up is that I know that the world of AI is fraught with slave labor, and it's something that concerns me a lot in terms of how we build our models, what bias is built into those based on who decides what goes into the models, and who's creating them in the first place. So we know that everybody likes to have, whether it's ChatGPT or even Google spitting out answers or whatever it is, we would like to have our world simplified in many ways by a variety of different AI tools that we use. And sometimes forget that the simpler these tools feel like they are to us means that there's a lot more human intervention in the first place. And we also know that the people that are behind the scenes on a lot of the data entry in that space are not necessarily being paid a living wage. So our standpoint on it is that the scientists that we employ for that data labeling for some of the AI models that we built, we employ fairly. They're under Australian law, I guess, and we make sure that we're doing that properly. I can't speak to the way people do it elsewhere out in the industry, but I'm really feel strongly about making sure that we do the right thing. It can actually disadvantage us a lot as well, because if you're competing against somebody that is paying someone pittance for doing the same type of stuff, then that's generally the way the world works as well. You think about Nike sweatshops and that sort of thing, and AI is in that same space as fast fashion, I think, as well. So I don't know if that goes anywhere towards addressing what you're asking.
Thank you.
This is a follow-on, so you are doing some labeling work, and this is a very unformed question, but so for your sea cucumbers, somebody's labeling them and then you're publishing that as well so that others can fine-tune their ability to find sea cucumbers. Is that the gist? Yeah, so a bit of a mix. So the initial labeling work for the sea cucumbers was done by a master's student, and she published all that stuff on GitHub. And so this is the question, this is the unformed question. So it seems to me that you touched on this, but all of these, this repository of drone data could be used as some kind of ground referencing system for, other satellite projects. And so, is there a concern about, geomatic control of these? I mean, drone data isn't perfect on any day. So how do you kind of control it? I mean, they fly it, they tell you where it is. It's not going to be perfect. You just let that be what it is. Yeah, it is. So you can. So all the data that goes on the platform can only be accepted if it's geotagged, and of course we know that depending on the drone that you've got and the GNSS that's on it is going to affect its accuracy. So maybe you've got an RTK drone and the positioning is going to be better, maybe not. But that's all in the metadata. It is all in the metadata. Okay, yeah. So it's user decide, user beware what. Okay. Yeah, it is, and to be honest,
I think when we first started doing this, there was a lot of pressure from outside people going, no, you have to get all the metadata standards, you have to get people entering this, and this. And I said, you know what? If you force a lot of that stuff, then people don't come to the party and play. And it's not fun anymore, right? So you're better off getting the metadata that's captured anyway in terms of the drones and the photos, the real basic stuff, the location, the time, the date, all that stuff. And if people want to write a story about their data collection, that's fine, they can. They don't have to. And yeah, you as a user, you can judge for that yourself. Like if you look at somebody's data set and you go, oh, I don't know about that, or I want to get in contact with them or whatever, or I need to re-georeference it because it's actually not, I can see that it's not quite in the right space. Yeah, go for gold. Yeah. Yeah.
A question about the data processing ability of the app. That's really interesting to me. Is there a price structure, or I assume it's all done in the cloud and has to be supported? So can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So the question was about the data processing and is there a price structure and stuff. So yeah, really. So again,
did you build it yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, a couple of questions in there. So the first thing is that we committed to storing and managing data for free. There's no cost in that. And then providing anything that you upload. So you come in, you fly your drone, you upload those photos to the system, and then anybody else, if you put it onto the FAIR map, the global map, anybody else and yourself can always download those data for free, right? So when we process it to the automosaic and the elevation models, you can still use those on the website, and that doesn't cost you anything to use that. But if you want to download them or stream them into a GIS, so you can directly pull from it, then it's under a subscription model to do that. But you can do that again for anything that's also on the global map as well. So you might go, yep, I actually don't have my own data, but I want to download that person's data. So then you pay under that subscription to do that. And the reason it's like that, I'll be honest in saying I do get some pushback from academics is to say, oh, it's all supposed to be free. That's, well, if I made it all free, then it's going to last till the end of this year, and that's it. Yeah. But we want something that's going to last into perpetuity. So there has to be a level of pricing that's built into that. But we make it available as what we think is the absolute minimum cost to maximize the accessibility to everyone. And as an academic, my students are my number one priority, right? So it's like, how do I make sure that I can do that? I have to have some payment, but I'll give as much as I can to make sure that happens. Yeah.
While we're checking, I see somebody might have done a chat question.
Yes.
Tell us.
I can. So the question is, can you give an example of how an Indigenous tribe has used the circular method you described and/or the global database? Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, I will, and then I'll grab your question up the back as well. So yeah, really good question. I had so there's actually this lady here. She's one of the Torres Strait Regional Authority rangers, and she works just north of Australia. And so she came on one of the trips that we were mapping the sea cucumbers and the habitats in which they live as well. And so she initially came on to get trained in how to use the technologies. So often we bring on some of the Indigenous rangers. So you got your park rangers here. We have similar in Australia, and some of those are set up very specifically as Indigenous or traditional owner groups as well. So they're sort of self-employed within their groups. So sometimes they'll come on a trip with us to gain the skills and then take that back to their community. We've got one particular group who's really super active in the work that they're doing. They're just north of where we live in Cairns, and they're doing both sea country mapping. So they're interested in their seagrasses and their coral, but they're also interested in monitoring their fire as well. So they'll do a lot of prescribed burns. So they'll fly before the fire and then fly directly after, and then a little while after that again to look at the recovery. And so they use the system to process the data to get any other data if anyone else in the community is mapping around the area as well. But mostly they're using their own data that they're feeding into their system that they're mapping with as well. So one of my favorite projects is working with those communities, because it allows me to say, well, we all know that drones are a real democratizing and decentralizing ability for data capture. And so if I can train people to do that, yeah, just go and be out there and start doing that Earth observation in your communities on the things that are most important to you. I'm really, really happy to support that. And it's lots of fun in the work that I do as well. Yeah.
Here in the US, you cannot apply drones in national parks. For example, a point raised, you cannot do that. And I don't know if you have the same problem, or if this is going to be global, there could be some of these problems. And
Yeah, so it's just a question around restrictions and flying in national parks and potentially other areas, I guess, as well. So yeah, in Australia, we've got areas that you can't fly, and same sort of thing here in terms of distance to airport and that. But over there's some restrictions in some national parks and some marine parks as well. So part of the Great Barrier Reef, you're not allowed to fly over without special permits. It's relatively easy to get a permit to fly in national and state parks in Australia, in most of them anyway. Some of them are definite no-nos, but yeah, you can. I think actually the biggest limitation here that I see in the United States at the moment is the crackdown on using the DJI drones. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but so the commercial drones that get used a lot, like you can see just up in the air, and this one here, just the really small drones that relatively readily available. The Chinese technology and the US government is really, really clamping down on their use. And I know I've got a lot of colleagues in United States universities that have bought them on grant funding through NSF or whatever, and they're not even allowed to use them anymore. They've been grounded through NASA, USGS, NOAA, etc. And I don't know how that's affecting here at UCB, but I know that that's a massive issue. And if you take out something that has got 80% of the market share for people being able to get out and doing that, it's a really, really big issue. It's not such a big issue in Australia just yet. They've only grounded through Department of Defence, but well, I don't know how that's going to play out. And there's no other really big player that's got something else in the market like that. Yeah.
One last question and then we'll close.
So I work for a nonprofit that finds communities around the world for collecting tons of data. And I'm just thinking maybe we should just upload all of it to your platform. Why not? But it makes me think, is there a kind of tagging or description? So you can kind of describe the data, okay. And then is there a way to, like, let's say, kind of expand the network of, so I collect some data, but someone wants some similar data nearby. Is there any kind of way to network with people?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we have started up a Discord workspace to try and get some of that going. When I have to say I'm not 100% successful in getting that, but I tend to find when I see people coming in, and if I know I can see that person's uploading a lot of data in this particular area, I know that I've got someone else there. I'll just email them both separately. Hey, do you want to be introduced to each other? Or I see that as well. If I see someone that's uploading a lot of, say, seagrass data, I'm like, hey, you should go and check out this person stuff. So I do a little bit of that, and like non-officially in the background, and really happy to connect people because I think that's super important as well. Yeah, but yeah, love your data. That'd be amazing. Yeah.
And so with that, she's here poaching students, as you can see. So thank you so much, Karen. It was absolutely all welcome to join us for our ESPM social.